Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about the 9 teams that will be competing in Korea Stage 1 for OWCS 2025. 9 teams will be competing for 4 spots at the Asia main event. And then once we get to the Asia main event, there will be 2 teams from there moving on to the first tournament happening in Hangzhou, China. I believe it's in Hangzhou, China. But before we look there, we have to look at the 9 teams that will be competing and take a look at their rosters. So today we're just going to look at the teams. I'll give you my thoughts on their rosters, where I think they kind of sit, and have a little bit of fun with it. It's going to be a little more casual. I'm not going to be doing an in-depth thing. Once we get to NA, EMEA, I might do some power rankings and we look at those teams. But at least for now, for this specific thing here, for Korea, we're just going to look at the teams and talk about the rosters and my thoughts on them. I am a little stuffed up, so if I sound a little weird to you, that's the reason why. It has been very cold. It has been snowy lately. I just traveled too, so I think all of those things are kind of working together to really mess me up. But let's throw up those rosters so you can see the 9 teams here. We have 4 partner teams here in Korea. Crazy Raccoon, T1, the return of T1. We got Team Falcons and Zeta Division. So 3 of the 4 teams that were dominating Korea last year are partner teams this year, plus then T1 comes in. And then we have Poker Face, Way, Vesta Esports Crew, New Era, and From the Gamer as the other 5 teams rounding out this top flight here. So, let's talk about these rosters. Like I said, it's going to be a little more casual. I'm not going to go super in-depth on any single one. I'm just going to give you my thoughts on them and do a broad kind of prediction for where I think these teams will go. So, starting, of course, from the top, we have Crazy Raccoon. This is the team that dominated most of last year, only really falling down once it got to that final tournament of the year, where Team Falcons was able to kind of overtake them in that final Malgameta. But this core roster is pretty much unchanged. I know they had Knife for a little bit of time last year before they dropped him. I believe it was Knife. But they have, very good players, very good DPS duo with Lip and Heesang. Lip was the MVP for the Asia region last year. You get Junbin Max, 2 phenomenal tank players. Junbin was one of your role MVPs for the main tank role. Charong and Shu were your support MVPs last year for the support, both main support and flex support. So this roster is really, really good. We know this team is very, very good. They still should be among the top teams here in Korea and in the world. I don't think that them running it back is a bad sign at all. I really do think this roster has everything you could need to succeed. I think you're not going to find many improvements unless you were stealing players from Team Falcons, which did not end up happening. So as far as I'm concerned, this is still a top 2 team in Korea. I don't think much is going to change on that front. I still think they are phenomenal, and I think we are just going to see, unfortunately, if you wanted to see a little bit more competition this year in Korea, there might be some, but I think Crazy Raccoon is still that good. I think they'll still be one of the best teams here in the world. Next, we have T1. You got Proud, Viper, Zest as your damage trio. You have Donghak as the tank on this roster, and then Opener and Skewed as the supports. Interesting team here. A lot of this team is made up of players who finished up the year on Haejokdan, which they didn't necessarily play on Haejokdan in the last season of OWCS, but there was that tournament, the Soup Cup at the end of the year, where Haejokdan, I think, got like 4th, 3rd, 4th. I don't remember exactly what the standings were. But they were one of the top teams, so it makes sense. So that's where Viper, Zest, Opener, Skewed, they were playing on that roster. A couple other players as well. They bring in Proud, who was on Poker Face, had a very good year, and then Donghawk, who spent the year on that Yeti Fnatic core, that kind of young core of players. A lot of big name players, a lot of familiar faces. If you're a T1 fan, you might recognize Skewed and Zest from their time on the Soul Infernal. Zest, of course, was there for a couple years. Skewed was there in 2023. So, very good roster. This is a very good core. It's a pretty young roster. A lot of these players are not like super big veterans. 2 to 3 years maximum in the Overwatch League, or some OWCS up and comers like Proud is. So it's not a huge like big name roster in history, but these are a lot of veterans, at least in the fact that they've been competing at a relatively high level for a while, even if they're not, players like what you have on Team Falcons, which of course we'll talk about Team Falcons, or even like Zeta or Crazy Raccoon, or some of those guys have been competing for 5-6 years at the highest level. Outside of Opener, I think might be the most senior, Opener and Skewed. And even then, like, Skewed's first season was, 2022? Maybe 2021? So, you're looking at a team with some pretty good, I guess 2021 for Opener, or for Skewed. So, not a ton of really, really, really high-end, like, super well-established MVP caliber talent on this roster. But very good, very solid. I think Donghawk's lack of major hero flexibility is kind of the one sour spot on this roster. And I think it's probably the thing that will hold them back from potentially being a top 2, top 3 team. But they're definitely in that conversation for the top 4. They should be one of, in my opinion, 2 teams to qualify for that Korea or that Asia land in that 4th spot. Because I do really like this roster. I love what they've done as a team. I think they've put together a pretty good roster based on what they had available to them. And I think there's a lot of really good talent on this roster that hopefully can take another leap forward and improve upon some of that, Yeti Fnatic core from last year that was okay at times, but kind of in the latter half of the year really just could not keep up with some of the other teams like Poker Face or Zeta Division, who just outclassed them. And even that the Hejok Dawn roster kind of outclassed them too, as you got later in the year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with this one. But I do like this team. It's pretty good. It's pretty solid all around. And glad to see T1 back in the Overwatch scene. Next, we of course have Team Falcons, pretty much running the entire roster back from last year. You have Proper, Stalker for the DPS duo. Happy does not return for this year. They go into this year with just Hanben on the tank. Smurf, of course, retired after Soup Cup, so no more Smurf. And then we have Chio Fielder, Surmajed once again as the support line. Not a lot of change there. Kind of expected that roster would largely remain, considering they were the team that won that final tournament of the year. Really good roster, really good team. I think the retirement of Smurf could have some impact on this team, but Hanben is so good and so flexible. I truly think this team is going to be totally fine. I just don't see a way that this team ends up struggling to find success when they were just so good so much of the time last year. They'll be fine. They'll be totally fine. Whether or not they need a second tank, I guess we'll see. But I think Hanben is good enough that even if they aren't in an ideal meta for him, they're still better than pretty much every other team here. And I think they'll be just fine without Smurf. Next, we have Zeta Division. Once again, they're pretty much running it back entirely the same way. They have Flora, Alpha Yi, and Pelican as their damage trio. Pelican, of course, joined this team kind of late in the year. I think it was right before the playoffs for Korea that he joined the team, so he didn't get to spend a ton of time with them. So he kind of comes in, helps bolster that DPS line a little bit, adding a little bit more flexibility, which is nice for them. For the tanks, they only have Bernard, no more Heesung, or of course Fearless, who left during the year last year. Just Bernard. I like Bernard a lot. I think he's a really, really good tank. I think he was underrated for a long time. Now I think he is properly rated. People know he's a beast. He's a really, really good player. One of the best in the business. Then you have the Violet Finn backline. Violet's going to do Violet things. He is one of the GOATs of Overwatch esports. We'll see what happens with this core again, but this was the team that basically was just the perpetual third place finisher in Korea. They would occasionally steal a win over Crazy Raccoon or Team Falcons. They would, they would push those teams to map 5, and they would lose in that 5th map. They were very, very good time and time again. They got 3rd even at Esports World Cup, but they were never able to get over the edge and get over the hump that was Crazy Raccoon or Team Falcons. So I would have liked to see them make maybe one more change to this roster, maybe bring in another hit-scan DPS player. Someone like Proud would have been a really interesting addition, I think, to this roster. Just to add a little bit more firepower on that role, to maybe allow you to compete a little better with Lip or with Proper. But Pelican's a good addition as well. Obviously a really good player, really talented DPS player. That just gives you a little bit more flexibility there on that flex roll if you needed to run like Genji Echo or Genji Tracer or Tracer Echo or whatever. Pelican and Alfie, I would feel a little bit more comfortable there on that than I would with, say, Flora on the Tracer. Flora, not a bad Tracer by any means, but I think you'd get better performance if you can put Alpha Yi on that Tracer and let Pelican play Echo or Genji or something like that. However you kind of work that around, I think you get a little bit more consistency there. I definitely struggle to see this team succeeding in really hard main tank metas. That is not Bernard's strength. And so if they end up in a main tank meta, I don't think they're going to do better than a team like Falcons, who have been a little bit more flexible in that department. I don't think Bernard is bad by any means, but kind of in a similar way to Team Falcons. I think Bernard is better than most of the other tanks in this region, that even in a meta that isn't the best for him, they will be okay. But in a head-to-head between Hanbin and Bernard, I'm going to take Hanbin. And if it's a main tank meta, I'm absolutely taking Junbin, So I still like this team. I still think they are the 3rd best team in Korea. I want to see them take that leap this year. I want to see them take that next step and be able to knock off a Crazy Raccoon or a Team Falcons. But right now, I don't have enough of a change in opinion from last year to think that they are going to really manage to do that this year as opposed to what they were able to do last year. Next, let's talk about Poker Face. Despite how good this team was last year, this version of the roster is so fundamentally different. I don't even know what really happened to that Poker Face roster from last year. It's gone. Like, most of those players are just totally elsewhere. Proud goes to T1. Fixa and Jwoo go to EMEA to play for Virtus Pro. Karu goes to Full House in Pacific. Simple goes to Team Vision, which I think is a Saudi org. I don't even know if did they even qualify? I don't remember. I don't think they did, but maybe they did. So that version of Poker Face is gone. It's blown up. Choi Zae-won was on that roster, gone. Everything is gone. Not a single piece from that roster returns. So they bring in this new roster. You have Alien, Dart, and Spint as your DPS line. You have Heiser and Garoom as your tanks, and you have Donghoon and Meeson as your supports. I'm concerned about this version of this roster. Garoom and Dart come over from Vesta Esports Crew, who notoriously not a very good team in Korea over the past year. They got, I think, last in Stage 1 and second to last in Stage 2. Even with some of the changes they made. Now, not every single player on this roster comes from that Vesta roster, but there are a couple of pieces there They do bring in Donghoon, who I think had a very good year on Aoma in EMEA contenders last year. They bring in Meeson, who spent part of the year, I think just the later, Super Cup part of the year, also as a member of that Haejok-dan team. But then you bring in Alien, Spint, Heiser, who, from everything I have seen, basically did not play on any teams last year. At least not on teams that were playing in OWCS in any of the regions. So this is a roster of a lot of kind of not super well known talent in recent years, and some players who didn't play on the best teams when they did play. And so I don't really love this version of this Poker Face roster. I would love to be proven wrong, but just looking at this core, I don't feel great about them. I would put them probably in my bottom 2 here in Korea. I just think that the other rosters here are better on paper, are better in terms of experience, and I just feel like they have done a little bit more this year with the talent that they added. So I don't love this Poker Face roster. I don't feel super confident in it, just based on the things I have seen from these players. That Vesta roster, like I said, was not very good, and I even think Vesta has done maybe a little bit better at making their roster look better. But even that's a little bit of a, I don't know. Even Vesta doesn't look very good, but it is what it is. This team's going to be interesting to watch. We'll see how they perform as we go ahead here. Next roster is Wei. They have a DPS duo of Aid and Who Are You. They have tanks Milgaru and Peppy, and then supports Lee Soo-min and Maka. So, collection of Korean players who were not I won't say most of them, but several of them were not really playing in Korea last year. Aid and Milgaru were playing in Japan on Insomnia. Who Are You was playing in the Pacific region on Full House. Also spent some time on Victory, which is I think a Saudi roster. I don't know what they were doing on that team, but that's also where Peppy was playing after he left Poker Face. And then you have Lee Soo-min, who spent some time at the beginning of the year on SPG, Saprissa Gaming, and then also was on that Haejok-dan roster at the end of the year. And then Maka started the year on that Genesis roster that everyone thought was going to be really good with Choi Jae-won and Decay. That then ended up being not good at all. And also spent some time on Bleed in the Pacific region. So, kind of bringing these players back to Korea on a roster. I like this core. I like some of the pieces here. Obviously, Who Are You? Very good player. I know Genji has been meta lately, and if Genji remains meta, this is a dangerous team for that region. I don't think they are going to be beating any of the top 5 teams. I think this is probably in that 6-7 area. But I think they're probably right now, I would put them just out of that top 5. I think they're probably about 6. Competitive with some of those top teams potentially. Definitely competitive with those middle or bottom of the top level teams. Your teams like T1 and another team we'll get to in a second here. But I think that they're not a team that inspires a ton of confidence in me to be able to go all the way and really find a ton of success against the top of the table. I would love to see Who Are You Genji pop off and just kind of carry maps, but also in a hero ban world, you might just ban Genji on good Genji maps, and you just kind of shut this team down in a lot of ways. So it's an interesting team to watch. It's a lot of talent that has found a pretty solid place here in Korea and in the Overwatch scene, but I don't feel amazing about any particular part of this team that I think they're going to be this exceptional, dominant force in Korea this year. Next, we have the new version of Vesta Esports Crew. Oh boy, this roster is fun to look at. So they have a DPS trio of Minute, Architect, and finally, Minute, the only piece returning from last year's Vesta Esports crew roster. Architect, Overwatch League veteran, didn't play last year, but he's back now with Vesta Esports crew. Let's go. I love Architect. It's my guy. Then finally, a player who I know literally nothing about. Don't even know what heroes they play. So I don't really have a lot to add there. Farmer, their tank player, didn't play on a team last year. So I don't really know much about them. And then we have Spinel, Jinsung, and Wuchan for the supports. Spinel spent some time on Poker Face and the Poker Face Academy team. Jinsung and Wuchan, it's been a while. It has been a while. Specifically Wuchan. I remember the name Wuchan from SPG back in 2023. Jinsung, I don't remember super well, but he also was on SPG. So this is a support line and some players who haven't played in a little while. So we'll see how good they look, but I would put them in that poker face category where I just don't feel great about this team really at all. And I think that they've got a lot to work on, I think, to really get to that point where they're really competing with some of those top level teams. This might be the team that just gets like 3-0 every match that they play. Because I really don't feel like there's a really strong part of this roster that inspires me. It's just there has to be a top 9 rosters in Korea, and they're certainly one of them. And we'll see. But Vesta, just an organization that doesn't have the best reputation. They don't tend to perform particularly well in these tournaments. So we'll see if they can reverse their fortune this year and be a bit more competitive than they've been in years past. Next, we have New Era. They have Archie and Dodo as their damage duo, Fearful and Ruler as their tanks, and then Search, MCD, and Kivis as their supports. MCD, the biggest name on this roster, spent a lot of time in EMEA last year. I think spent some time in North America as well at the start of the year, but spent most of the time in EMEA on Hypnos and Twisted Minds. A decent year for MCD last year, all things considered. Comes back as kind of the well-known piece on this roster. Archie spent some time on Six Blow in Japan last year. Dodo, not coming from any major rosters. Fearful also played on a Japanese roster, but it was Ravati for him. Ruler was on that Old Ocean roster that what's-his-face was on. Why can't I remember his name? That's really embarrassing. Anyway, Ryu Jae-hong, the roster he was on. And then Search was an assistant coach on Niam Gaming in Japan. And Kivis wasn't on a roster. So a lot of guys coming back from Japan for this one. This is also probably in that bottom tier for me. I just don't feel great about any of these rosters. It's hard for me to rank them specifically. If I had to do like a tier list, I would put Poker Face, Vesta, and New Era in D, where they'll win games against each other, but I don't know if they'll win many games beyond that. I just think that they don't really have solid, strong, big-name players, right? This is the up-and-coming talent here in Korea. The ones who have made it through the kind of open qualifiers as those 7, 8, 9-seeded teams. They had to beat out all the rest, so they're good enough to make it here. I don't think they're good enough yet to get to that next level. And maybe we'll be surprised. There's always a team that surprises us. Korea's been pretty cut and dry. It's usually pretty easy to predict who's going to be good and who's going to be not so good. So I don't expect this team to be among the very good category. But I'm curious to see how they're able to perform as we go into this season. Final team we have is From the Gamer, and I think this team is fascinating. So you have the DPS duo of Prophet and Sonjun, you have tank player Heesung, and you have the support line of Vindame Vigilante. Prophet, of course, started last year on Runaway. Runaway disbanded. He was not playing for a little bit. Joins that Haejokdan roster late in the year. There was a lot of players on that roster. Not everyone got signed to T1. Some of them went separate ways. He comes to this roster with Vindame, who also was on that Haejokdan roster. Sonjun, I think, was also on Haejokdan, but not that iteration of it. He was on the one that competed in Korea Stage 2. But Sonjun also played for TSM and Timeless last year. He spent some time with Shikigami late in the year, so he played quite a bit. Heesung, of course, played for Zeta Division as their secondary tank player last year. And then Vigilante spent some time on Runaway at the beginning of the year, and then Twisted Minds late in the year before he had his health issues that forced him to go back to Korea. So a lot of players that have played together. Obviously, 3 players who had some time on Haejokdan, maybe not all overlapping. Vigilante and Prophet were both on that Runaway roster. This is a talented roster, players that are known and very, very much so well known. I think this is the other roster that's pushing for that number 4 spot along with T1. I think there's a lot of similarities between these rosters. There's a lot of very good pieces on both of those rosters, a lot of firepower on both of these rosters. I think we are looking at a 5-horse race for those 4 spots. And I really think that's going to be the fun of this group and the fun of this season, is seeing which of these 5 rosters really do kind of elevate themselves in a way. We're all pretty sure that Falcons and Crazy Raccoon are number 1 and number 2. We still think Zeta is that number 3. But that 4 spot is up for grabs, right? Is it going to be the other partner team with T1, or is From the Gamer going to steal that spotlight and get that really nice position going into that tournament as a non-partnered team stealing some of the fun? We don't know yet. But I do like this team a lot. I really like the pieces they have here. I've been very impressed by Prophet. He didn't have a great debut when he joined the Overwatch League back in 2023, but I think last year he was pounding. Sonjun is very, very good. I do have some concern about the support line, mainly just that Vindame was not great when we saw him in the Overwatch League in 2023, and Vigilante has been pretty good, but has not really been a consistent player. He's had a lot of things that have caused him to kind of drop out, or he didn't play as much as maybe we would have liked to see out of him. So I think this roster has the talent to be a top 5 or top 4 roster. I don't know if they have the consistency to show up enough at a high enough frequency to guarantee themselves a top 4 spot, but they certainly have what I want to see out of a team to be in that conversation. So those are your 9 teams. Let me know your thoughts on them in the comments down below. I kind of rambled longer than I thought I was going to, but that's what I do. That's how I am. So let me know your thoughts about any of these teams in the comments down below. Do you agree with me on these teams? Do you disagree with me on these teams? Let me know. I want to hear your opinions on it. Obviously, these teams will have started playing last night, but I won't have seen them by the time I'm recording this video, so don't worry about that. That's going to be all, though, for me for today. Thank you all once again. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Obviously, Japan, Asia, Pacific, and North America EMEA, those videos will be coming. And then China, when China gets underway, we'll talk about all of those. But for now, this is where I leave you all for today. So thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time. Bye-bye.